Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Whoops. Hey, hello, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, September 12th. Maybe that's it. It's not quite Friday the 13th, but it's almost just as bad as Friday the 13th. It's Friday, September 12th, 2025, time for another show. And, man, we are going to have to, well, now we're going to have to do some editing. Sorry, folks. All right. It won't make much difference certainly will make no difference for those of you listening to the podcast. Those of you listening live, I tried to at least get things happening on time. But, yeah, we had some, I don't know. Getting prepared, trying to sit down, get ready for today's show. Ian Reifowitz to be on hand with us to discuss all sorts of topics. Unavoidably, I think Charlie Kirk still kind of top of the news, although, you know, there are actually some very, 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 very extremely important things happening around the country and around the world. But the news organizations still kind of focusing on, I don't know how you turn away from, you know, national manhunt for someone who perpetrated a now nationally televised shooting murder. So I imagine that will stay in focus, although I don't know what the current status of things are. The FBI has, you know, mishandled everything, as I guess most people are pointing out. Certainly the social media buzz on it, it was hard to believe that anything else could possibly have happened other than bungling this thing at the FBI level, given that, Trump has decided to make two right-wing podcasters director of the FBI and deputy director of the FBI. These guys, you know, they're not cut out for this job and haven't got any idea of what to do, and there's nobody around them that does, because all of them were fired. Most of them fired in the January 6th purge. Basically, you know, anybody with any experience was an enemy, a target for the Trump administration, and they wanted them out of the organization. And when they finally made the determination that anyone who was involved in the investigation of January 6th had to go, well, that was the largest investigation in FBI history. So probably it involved the most agents and other FBI personnel of any investigation in history. And also probably, because it was an extremely important investigation, probably involved some of the best. And so, you know, a purge designed to cripple the FBI. And as a matter of fact, I did see somebody say just the other day on Blue Sky, as always, which is what I'm usually monitoring. Here it is. Gus Orviston. I don't think I know Gus, but Gus Orviston says, a perpetual grad student, in case you were wondering, says, look, I mean, Trump's goal up until yesterday was to exact revenge on the FBI, not for the FBI to be good at their jobs. These are completely, fundamentally incompatible goals, and everyone in the Trump administration assumes that no matter what they do, the departments and organizations will stay competent. And, you know, that's just not very likely to be the case. And then, of course, you have the president sitting atop this structure. I have been searching the news for updates that match with what the chyron of Fox News says. I guess Trump must have stayed in New York after taking a nap at the 9/11 memorial and has put himself in on the set of Fox News this morning with what I guess in ordinary times, I don't know. Would it be an extraordinary chyron to it would be under these circumstances, I guess. So he's sitting there on the couch with the morning crew with the chyron, President Trump, we have Kirk suspect in custody. Now, my search of all the news is manhunt continues, et cetera. I have the sense that what might have happened is they've grabbed up another suspect. They're still not sure. This would be number 3 that they're just not sure of. And Trump was like, look, I'm going on TV. When a president like me goes on TV, he announces results. So I have a feeling he may have gotten out ahead of this story. He may know something that the FBI is ready to announce, but they haven't announced it yet. And, you know, nobody's going to discipline this president. So, well, that and a number of other things. It looks like a pretty insane appearance from top to bottom. But let's get started. Ian Reifowitz is here. He's got a new book out. It bears some relevance to what's going on because, well, that's because those are the kind of books he writes. Good morning, Ian. How are you doing?
Good morning, David. I am well. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be on with you, and I appreciate your connecting of the dots here very much, including connecting my book in some way, because I hope people find it interesting.
Yeah, now it's brand new, and I think the last time we spoke, we were finishing things up, the formalities that had to get out of the way before publication date. It's now published, and you'll recall it's an academic sounding title, but bears relevance to all of the things we discuss here. Riling Up the Base. Gosh, anything happening there? Riling Up the Base, examining Trump's use of stereotypes through an interdisciplinary lens. That's the bent that lets you know that, this might be discussed in class. Interdisciplinary.
Yes, interdisciplinary is a word we academics use to signal that it's actually time to get your pillow ready because you might fall asleep.
I have always had difficulty with that. My academic reading is, I've read this page 7 times and I haven't been awake in any of them. What's happening? But
well,
this
interdisciplinary. Yes, we try in the book to instead of just say Trump said this, Trump said that.
Yeah.
We haven't. There are a number of different ways, through a number of different lenses, so to speak, communications theory, psychology, things like that, where we try to understand, or actually we try to explain how Trump's use of stereotypes hits with people, right? Why they're effective, how they're effective. I mean, it's not a biological analysis, but, using these sort of social science theories, we try to get an understanding of why this stuff works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
which
everybody needs to know that it's as much a political science study as anything else, and the interdisciplinary approach, the last form of diversity still permitted on college campuses, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Yeah, we'll check back with us. I'll check back with you next week. But for now, yeah. But look, I mean, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, because not everybody is on board. But perhaps for most of your listeners, we know that Trump has used stereotypes. It's a big part of how he communicates. He's been doing it for 40 years, but certainly his political career is defined by it. His very first, his announcement for president in 2015, coming down the escalator, he actually went off script from what his guys had prepared for him.
Yes.
And although the issue was in the speech, but he started talking about, Mexicans coming across the border, they're rapists and they're drug dealers. So almost his entire campaign, and there's no reason to think that his campaign would have been successful. Certainly in the Republican primary, had he not differentiated himself from the likes of Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and the others, Jeb apostrophe Bush, right? I mean, in some ways, he and Jeb Bush were exact opposites, right? Jeb Bush talked about, coming across the Rio Grande without, any documentation as an act of love, and Trump basically said, "I'm going to do the exact opposite." It's an act. Not only is it against the law, but it's actually something that's going to make you likely to be raped or murdered.
Yeah. Oh.
And he just took down Jeb. And so the book isn't about this 2016 campaign, but the point is, we do make the point that his stereotypes really were central to him defeating 16 other candidates, many of whom were serious candidates. And
relatively
winning control of the Republican Party, a control that he has maintained since the early 2016, and which he will maintain certainly through January 2029 or November 2028 or whatever, and possibly beyond if he is fortunate enough to live that long. We'll have to see. But stereotypes have made Donald Trump the dominant political, social, cultural figure in the United States, and given this position of the United States, probably in the world. And stereotypes played a large part in that.
Yeah.
He is
Well,
he's a world historical figure, and
unfortunately, you're right. True.
there's no question about that. He is,
You
and
have to accept that part.
stereotypes have been a big part of that.
Yeah, I guess it's been just at the heart of everything that he's done, and I guess it's really at the heart of what I guess we now identify as the culture war. It seems I don't know which came first, or maybe they're just the same. Maybe it's just two different terms for the same sort of approach to politics. But I mean, they seem pretty well bound up in all of that. The identity politics, which of course culture warriors spend their time condemning identity politics, but of course in order to fit in and find your place in the culture war on their side, it's as much as an identity thing as it is for anybody, as any other things that they accuse others of doing are for them. It's, I guess, is the way I might have to work with an editor on getting that sentence out better, but I mean, it's ironic that and hypocritical, and also, I guess, par for the course. This is just the way they sort of play everything, but it has been extraordinarily powerful for them. I guess now that I'm thinking about it, I see about the different ways it ties into so many things. I guess their anti-science bent comes as an outgrowth of that too. I mean, what would be the point of science if you are making policy based on stereotypes? Evidence doesn't have anything to do with the way I live my life. Why should it have anything to do with the way I conduct my science, I suppose?
Right. I mean, and we're talking about Trump's rhetoric. Obviously, the issue hanging over everything we discuss, today is still the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So since we're talking about this, I want to make it clear. It should go without saying, obviously, I condemn any political violence. Political violence has no place in a democracy. It's despicable. And any rhetoric that, for lack of a better word, inspires violence is rhetoric that we have to avoid as a society. And we have to avoid as individuals who speak in the public arena.
Yes.
Donald Trump using stereotypes is rhetoric that has, and this is in the book, that has led to violence. He's certainly not the only one, but he is the biggest voice in the country. And unfortunately, we know that that's the case. In the book, we talk about a couple of crimes where people were attacked. There was one in Boston where people were attacked because the attackers thought, either correctly or incorrectly, that they were immigrants or quote unquote illegal immigrants, and actually cited Trump as an inspiration for their attacks. Right. So this is something that's a direct correlation, as direct a correlation as you're going to find. There's all kinds of rhetoric out there. Is it on all sides? Sure. But I think it's disingenuous not to recognize the difference between fringe figures on the left who use rhetoric that either is violent or might inspire violence, and the rhetoric on the right that does so, which is mainstream within conservative movement, right up to the very top, which is the president of the United States. And we've all got to do better, but the people doing the worst have the most better to do.
I guess that's a good way of putting it. And obviously there's, I think it's fairly obvious. There are, of course, people on what is now the mainstream right who have an interest in disagreeing with that being the case. But it seems plain enough to me. And it seems almost inherent in their approach to the stereotyping. It seems to me that when you find stereotypes and violent rhetoric, well, not even the stereotypes. It's really that seems more one-sided. I want to address that as the subject of the book, certainly, but the violent rhetoric that tends to be deployed, I guess, for lack of a better term, from the left or from fringes of the left, tends to be about, certainly about garnering attention, but there's a awareness, I think, among those using this rhetoric that they are on the fringe and that they're trying to force their way into mainstream discussion, whereas it seems to be the base assumption of right-wing violent rhetoric that everybody thinks this. I'm speaking what everybody's thinking but afraid to say. And I think that's just interesting as a psychological approach. There's one side that sort of thinks everybody's violent and this is the way it ought to be. That's the culture war. And one side that says I'm using violent rhetoric as a way to, force my way into the conversation from the outside. People aren't paying enough attention to me and I'd like to use it to garner attention. It's a very different use of the tool.
Right. Well, and this touches on something that I did mention a little bit ago, which is that it wasn't certainly not dominant among there wasn't what the leader of the Republican Party did before 2016.
Right.
But Trump used that rhetoric, not so much the violent, because that, but fear monger. I mean, if you want to get deeper into it, fear mongering, and how much does fear mongering and hate spewing inspire violence. But he did that not only to differentiate himself. Well, he did it to differentiate himself from the other Republican candidates, but it resulted in him winning.
Yes,
that was he differentiated himself, and the audience liked it. They picked him.
Yeah,
they didn't pick him only for the way he talked about immigration, but immigration was his lead issue, right? That was the speech. Mexican migrants coming across the border are rapists. If there was a thesis to his campaign, it was that. And then obviously the corollary was, and I'm going to protect you. And they, being the Democrats, or at least at first his opponents, like Jeb Bush, but then the Democrats want them to come. They want open borders. They either don't care about the crime that's going to hurt you, or somehow they're complicit in it because they want those people to come across the border so that they can then steal elections with these illegal immigrant voting, blah 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 blah, which is just not true.
Yeah.
Right? But it connects. It's a story, but it's a story that's built on the stereotypes and fear and a conspiracy theory. I mean, these are all things that are fringe in the sense of they're not supposed to be what a president does, right? But it is now. It's not what Mitt Romney did. It's not what John McCain did. John McCain was really excellent in pushing back against that. Arguably, it's not even what George W. Bush did. It goes back maybe to George Wallace, but it is about identity politics, and I'm glad you mentioned that, right? Because when Trump, this is one of the things we talked about in the book, when Trump uses those stereotypes, he says, "I'm one of you."
Yes.
We think this way,
which is
they don't.
Ridiculous
right?
thing as I think about the way he lives his life.
Right, but it is. There's an identity politics there. It's I get you. I'm like you. We are pushing back against them who are telling us what not to think. So there's an identity politics aspect to it there. It's connected to, although it's not only, but it's connected to this sort of, the white Christian identity politics, which goes back as far as America's existence. Alongside this egalitarian tradition, there's also this other tradition, which it was, enshrined in law, obviously, until the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and is certainly at the core of what Trump does, right? But it does extend beyond that in that you certainly have members of other non-white groups that might also feel, oh yeah, I agree with those stereotypes. And so it's a way, certainly in 2024, maybe less so in 2016 and 2020, but it showed that between 2020 and 2024, some of these non-white groups, in particular Latino voters and somewhat Asian American voters, found more appeal in that message. But yeah, it's about us and them. Not only is it us and them ideologically, but it's us and them in that we get it and they don't. And we have to stick together, we who think this way, and should rally behind this guy who talks and thinks the way we do.
Yeah, it's it's not at all clear that at the outset, certainly that most Americans did, and it's still not most Americans, and his policies. I mean, the polling tells us that it still remains unpopular. All of his policies, not everything has come home to roost just yet, but I don't think any of his policies, including the things that were supposedly his exclusive strength, his particular approach to immigration issues and border issues, now at last underwater with public polling. It's kind of it's an interesting dynamic that, but the election's done and he's cemented in for at least 4 years, and of course he thinks he can cement himself in maybe forever, no matter how long he lives. But it's amazing how unpopular the policy in practice turns out to be, and how day after day, story after story of revelation to people who had supported him at the polls, finding out that actually the simplistic, stereotype-driven policy is not what they thought it was, and is in fact directly detrimental to them. And I don't know. And yet they say, well, all right, so he's made a mistake on immigration, but I definitely think it's a great thing for everybody to have to buy Trump coin or something. And somehow they ignore that.
Right. Well, even if
explaining it.
We talk about his base,
yes,
right, being 1/3 of the population at most, and so that's not even all of his voters.
Right. So I guess
but they got riled up
together,
right?
That's right, and now we know how. We have a whole book about it, as a matter of fact. By the way, by way of update, and this is an interesting dynamic all by itself, and some other, I guess maybe another type of stereotype at work, slightly different. But the news cycle is now catching up. It looks to me like the guess was correct that Donald Trump had some inside information as president of the United States. Whether or not it was correct, I'm not sure. I'm sure there was enormous pressure on Kash Patel. Look, I'm going on TV. Call me before I go on and tell me you have a suspect in custody, because I'm going to say there's a suspect in custody, whether he is or isn't. But he may have gotten that call and gone ahead and announced it. But the news organizations are having to follow up with, now, mind you, this is a manhunt for a person who essentially, for all intents and purposes, committed a murder on live television. What ended up, it's basically perfect substitute for live television. Assassinated somebody in front of 10,000 cell phones. So almost the same thing. So extraordinarily important. And he goes on and he says, we have a suspect in custody. The way everybody else has to treat it is with headlines of Trump says there's a suspect in custody. The FBI doesn't say it. Local police don't say it. The usual people that we put on camera to make sure everybody knows that it's true and official that there's a suspect in custody aren't ready for that. But Trump says it, so we have to say something. And all we're allowed to say is that Trump says it, which is, I think, extraordinarily unusual. Authorities announce that there's an arrest. Easy. Everybody understands it. Trump says it. It'll pass because he's wearing a suit and he's the president and he's on television. So I guess that's the headline, which is unusual to say the least. And I guess plays to our stereotypes about how we get our news too. So America is sitting there saying it's fine that on one program's morning news show, he says it and everybody, now the whole apparatus has to react. We have no facts, but he said this thing. So here you go.
Well, it's a fact that he said it.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, no fall back on that too. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just by way of watching the news. They have not yet come around to saying, yeah, they do have a suspect in custody. It's all it is well, Trump says it and nobody says they don't. So okay, that's kind of bizarre all by itself. And I guess this was to be expected. Another sort of odd perspective on governing by stereotype and policy by stereotype. It seemed plain yesterday that Trump was determined to have his suspect arrested, and this suspect was going to be the following type of person, period, the end. And you could see the groundwork being laid for, look, if we haven't caught somebody in the next 18 hours, I want you to grab somebody that looks like this and say this is the person. It's very difficult to trust law enforcement, which is an awful position to be in, but very difficult to trust officialdom at the top of these law enforcement organizations when it seems so obvious that this was the pressure, that Trump was going to... Trump spent time yesterday describing exactly what kind of leftist radical maniac the shooter absolutely positively must be. We had no information about it. He had no information about it, but America needed to know that their president said that whoever they decided to arrest and parade in front of the cameras was going to be a leftist radical. And does it work? Does it good police work? Will it result in a fair trial or even a correct detention? I don't know. We have yet to find out. So
yeah, I mean, you have these law enforcement officials confirming X, Y, and Z. I mean, I guess I'll take that at face value. But what's more, what's upsetting is exactly what you said, that right off the bat, you had some people, and I saw some really nice examples that you might have mentioned, right? The Connecticut Young Republicans, Connecticut Young Democrats coming together and speaking as one, to get rid of, to squash this kind of rhetoric. But we definitely got a one-sided response from Trump. You saw it from Elon Musk. There's not a lot of self-reflection there. And, I think that's par for the course, unfortunately, with this president. Like I said, we can all do better, but he has chosen to not do better in the wake of Charlie Kirk's tragic death.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
all right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Well, we've all got a lot of better to do, as we said on our way out into the break. It looks like the news organizations, just one last update on this, are ready to now confirm that I guess law enforcement officials are speaking up and releasing the name of the suspect who's currently in custody. One hopes that this time they're a little more sure, because this would be the third person of interest that they've taken into custody. And I guess one of yesterday's minor stories was one of the first two people who was taken into custody, and there's plenty of video, since everything was on video from the other day, lots of video of people watching him be carted off by the police and hurling abuse and making death threats right on the spot. And then it turns out that this mistakenly apprehended person there, on the day of the event, was there as apparently just a huge Charlie Kirk fan, and his whole family puzzled and distraught at the fact that he could go to see one of his heroes, as unfortunate as that is, speak, and then this event happens and he's murdered, and you imagine then being, carted away and blamed by your fellow Charlie Kirk fans as the murderer of Charlie Kirk. But, well, stereotype at work there. I guess anybody who's being marched off in handcuffs, we're sort of conditioned to believing that, well, good police work has probably preceded this, and there was probable cause and will later be due process. So anybody being marched off in handcuffs is probably in for this kind of abuse. And, well, it's not always true. I do hope he's thanking his lucky stars for due process having set him free. Probably last week he was a little bit down. If he's a Charlie Kirk fan, probably a little bit down on the whole due process thing until it came and saved his life. So we'll see. But all right, we won't. We can probably jump off the subject at this point. Charlie Kirk can't dominate everything, but it's so interesting and reveals so much about how we react to events, how we can even be conditioned to accept policy and execution of policy that's totally anomalous and out of keeping with what we think of as the American system of justice, so long as it takes on certain forms and is presented to us in certain ways that, matches with our stereotypes about the way things work.
Well, yeah, and that's really the issue is if you believe that we should have certain rules, but then you throw them out when circumstances are unique or fit a certain set of circumstances, well, then you don't really have those principles, do you? You're just working on an ad hoc basis, and you have sort of like what we do most of the time and what we do when I say we need to do it.
Yes.
Well, that means it's not the rule of law anymore. It's clearly not. Rules and principles and freedoms and liberties, which I really do remember Republicans definitely talking about at some point. Freedoms and liberties either exist whenever they are, whenever all the time. They either exist all the time or they don't. That doesn't mean yes, there's no limits on the First Amendment because you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about when you're going to deprive somebody of their liberty by through the criminal justice process, which has to happen, obviously, when people commit crimes. Either you follow the Constitution whenever such circumstances arise, or it's meaningless.
Yes.
Because if somebody can make an arbitrary decision, then the document doesn't matter because it can be overridden by whoever has the authority to override it. And
certainly watching
rule of
it
law,
happen.
right? Rule of law or rule of one man or one person. You can't have it be sometimes.
Right. These are supposed to be enduring principles, and you're not supposed to have to, by the way, vindicate. Although this is a major right-wing Second Amendment theory, you're not supposed to have to vindicate your enduring rights every time, either through force or threat of force or at the point of a gun. They're supposed to be afforded to you, and everyone's supposed to generally agree that you have every chance in a court of law to vindicate them, as opposed to, well, maybe you don't get this, or maybe it's special circumstances, or I'm declaring an emergency. This, too, is an anomaly of the Trump administration. More emergency appeals, by the way, to the Supreme Court than pretty much any or all of the previous administrations, and it's only been 6 or 7 months. And one of the more recent responses from the Supreme Court, another emergency appeal and another administrative stay from the shadow docket, in which the Supreme Court has more or less, at least temporarily, okayed under emergency circumstances the idea that maybe it is all right for police to racially profile suspects on the street and stop them and ask them for their identity papers, because the president has declared that there's an emergency about that sort of stuff. And there's no reasoning behind it that makes any sense under the Fourth Amendment, but the Supreme Court seems determined to say, well, we have the ability to say, without any reasoning, at least temporarily, this part of the Constitution that you've all understood to be the case, all these years, not so much. We'll get back to you later about why. It's a little troubling.
A little troubling. Look, I am also a historian,
Yes.
in addition to writing about politics. And so while I'm going to preface what I'm about to say by saying that the United States in 2025 is not Nazi Germany at any point, it's just not. I'm not even going to say yet, because that's whatever. It's not. Having said that, the word emergency is something that 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 those who study the history of Europe, that study the history of Germany in the 20th century, it's an important word. Why? Because after World War I, when the German Empire turned into the German Republic, they had a democratic constitution. It was a democratic society. The Constitution, as any historian of that period can tell you, had a fatal flaw, right? You had an elected parliament. You had the chancellor, who's the prime minister, who was chosen based on having the support of the majority of the elected members of the parliament. There was also an elected president who was essentially a figurehead, much like figurehead elected presidents in other democracies that have some divided powers. But the president, it was written into the Constitution, which was called Weimar, named after the city where it was written, and that's the era is called Weimar Germany, right? That's where the word Weimar Germany comes from.
See.
The Constitution said, if the president declares an emergency, or not even if the president, when there's an emergency, the president can rule by decree.
Well,
and everybody
tempting.
looking, right? Everybody with 20/20 hindsight said, "Oh my God, they wrote this fatal flaw into the Constitution." And of course, at one point, before Hitler, actually, in 1931, President Hindenburg, a World War I hero, worked with the prime minister and basically just declared an emergency, and they ruled by decree even before Hitler took power. But once that happened, and it wasn't like they did it for 24 hours. Once that happened, everybody knew that essentially German democracy was dead. So emergency powers can be the death of a democracy. And we've got to be really careful about giving the person who is at the head of the federal government emergency powers, because, boy, that's a road, that's really hard to come back from if you get a president, right, like this one who wants to push his powers to the limit.
Yeah, and it removes the limits. So we have our own problems already in our own recent history with emergency powers, with presidents of both parties. How did the Hindenburg legacy work out, by the way? Just wondering.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, lots of historical bells being rung with that. And I don't think I was as personally familiar with the German history. Vaguely, you learn it in passing in your general history. But certainly a good point that has an echo in our own recent history, our own recent politics that, in some cases hasn't quite made it to the history books yet, although as you constantly reminding us, we're getting older. So a lot of the things that we think of as, no, that's current politics. They have chapters now. And emergency powers in the wake of the global war on terror. This what is now in history books was the subject of the earliest democratic, liberal and progressive blogging in the wake of like yesterday's reminder, the 9/11 attacks and the war in Iraq. And it became clear at that point to me in dramatic fashion, and I'm sure to others well before it and in incidents well before the global war on terror, that the granting of emergency powers in congressional acts, an unfortunate and ill-advised shortcut when Congress just wasn't sure what contingencies to prepare for. They basically said, look, we have a pretty good vetting process for presidents in this country, and it's ultimately, in the end, with the safeguards of the courts and being able to challenge things in courts and an elected Congress, with the various systems, the vaunted system of checks and balances, which appears to not have really held up all that well over the years. In this situation, it's okay to grant the president broad and extensive powers if he will put it all on the line politically and put his name to a declaration of an emergency. And in addition to all the things that are wrong with the way Donald Trump operates, the depth of thought and consideration in any of his actions is just never apparent and just never there. And the idea that he's given thought to the long-term implications of finding out, oh, if I just say the magic words emergency, I can do these things? And in some cases, the answer to that is no, that's not what it means. Well, I didn't hear you. That's not what I heard when you said emergency. And he's inventing powers along the way, which, I guess is the only way to compound the danger of emergency powers, is putting somebody in there who has no concept of what the boundaries of those emergency powers are. As he says on television only minutes ago, his position now on the takeover of D.C. is, I can do anything I want, which is a phrase he's used before in even broader context. And he says, I can replace the mayor if I want. No, that's not part of the emergency. No one actually ever contemplated that as part of the emergency powers. But it's now been said by a person on a suit on television who purportedly is the president of the United States, with no opposition from the journalists surrounding him. A lot suits and ties everywhere. So now that's a theory that's floating out there. And now we're going to have an open debate on whether or not that's the case, in honor of the necessity of open debate, apparently. Wow.
Well, I know this for a fact. The word emergency doesn't appear in the Constitution.
That's
right?
true.
The Constitution does not grant any emergency powers to the president. And there are a lot of words that don't appear in the Constitution. That's fine.
Sure.
But the point is that unlike in the German Constitution, where it was explicit and they said, oh, maybe there'll be an emergency, our founders said that there are no circumstances under which a president can see that there's an emergency and thus do things that he can't, or she, in theory, can't do under normal circumstances. Those set of circumstances don't exist. Mm-hmm. Now, Congress has authorized the creation of emergencies. There's a process and yada, yada, yada. But the other issue is that if the president's party has a majority in Congress, they can simply pass the law to rubber stamp any emergency. They'd rather not get their hands dirty and take up Congress's time. But the point is that they could either stop or.
Oh, I believe we've either had you go mute or lost our signal. Let's see. All right, Ian. Let's see. It doesn't say you're disconnected, but perhaps you must be. If by now we haven't unmuted, we'll have to give you another call. Wow, okay. I'm not certain I can explain exactly what happened here, but perhaps if I try reconnecting, will this work? I don't know. I don't think I've had to handle it this way. Usually everything seems to be, let's see. We usually have our guests calling in and the call's not going out. Okay. Let's see. Shall we? Okay. This is rather unfortunate. We'll try this again. And I'll call you and see if we can't connect this way. Well, we'll have to figure out what's going on here. Ian?
Yes.
Are you there?
Did you miss all of that last great rant?
I think so. Was it the basis for a new book? I hope you recorded it.
Yeah. Well, briefly, I think the point is Congress is supposed to have authority. According to the Constitution, we have something that we talk about all the time in history, and even it's something part of the national sort of lexicon. Checks and balances, right?
Yes.
There's checks and balances. We have Republicans in Congress who don't believe in that. They simply don't, because they could do one of two things. They could go on record and pass as official legislation the things that Trump wants to do. Let's say specifically on tariffs. Or they could stand up and say, no, we don't want this. But they choose to do neither of those things. And by doing so, they cede the authority that the Constitution, our founders and our country decided, is necessary. And and what I had said was that in 1974, you had people like Barry Goldwater who went to Richard Nixon and say, no, the things you're doing are beyond the bounds of the Constitution, and you've got to go. Where is Barry Goldwater today?
Well, yes.
Well, I know where he is, but where is today's Barry Goldwater?
That's true. Okay, I see what you mean. We could tell you, we could give you a geolocation.
Yeah.
But right. There's no equivalent figure, and that has to do with what you were discussing earlier, the complete and total takeover of the Republican Party by Donald Trump. There's just no oxygen available inside the Republican Party long term without acknowledging his leadership and bending your approach to everything to suit that. And everybody who has tried has found themselves forced out. It's a really interesting thing what he's done long term. That's one of the big mysteries. What happens post Trump to the Republican Party? It could you could see it very easily collapsing, and I'm sure being reborn in some other form. But it may very well just be the end of the party. There's nobody in particular that really looks like they could step into his shoes. He's such an enormous figure. In the worst possible way, but you have to acknowledge his influence and power there. Not only is there no obvious successor, but I've just been thinking about the way he's been handling the New York City mayoral race, for instance. That he wants a certain outcome, and in order to get it, he's saying, yeah, you know what, the Republican nominee should drop out of the race entirely. I found that astounding. But, it may have to do with the unique weirdness and weakness of the Republican nominee. But I don't know. He certainly seems willing to burn down the Republican Party. He's not interested in establishing it as the ruling party. He's interested in establishing Trump and maybe other Trumps as the ruling family more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, and I think to look at the Republicans in Congress and Trump together, they never say to themselves, are we following the principles that we should be following, the rules that we should be following in order to have a healthy democracy? For them, the end justifies the means. I want this, therefore I will take it. And in the long run, that's not a good place for a society to be, because if the other side feels it has no choice but to do the same, then nobody is respecting the rules. And if there are no rules, then it's not much of a civilization, and we know where that leads. But if the other side does respect the rules sort of unilaterally, then the side that's not respecting them has a huge advantage tactically and can use that to maintain power. And we see that with the gerrymandering. I think the failure by the Supreme Court in, I believe, 2019 to ban partisan gerrymandering as unconstitutional will go down as one of the great failures if American democracy really, is unable to come back from the Trump era. That's going to go down as just a tremendous failure, because at some point, Democrats had to say, well, listen, if you're going to steal from us, and we have two options: say, I don't like this, or steal where we can to at least keep things as close to even as possible. That's a disastrous situation. It's obvious that you should not have that parties that have a majority in a given state should not be able to use that majority to lock in that majority forever, or to lock in a huge majority of the congressional delegation. Nobody would create a system from scratch that says that that's a good idea. There's no way to defend it.
Sure.
But what's so frustrating is that you have in the Trump Republican Party specifically, people who there is no question would argue that X is wrong if the other side is doing it, but argue not only are we going to do it, but it's morally right. There are just no actual principles, none, at all.
No, apparently not.
right? And that's what's so frustrating. Could you imagine, they love the Electoral College. Do you really, because it gives it, you have to have X, Y, and Z, whatever. If the Electoral College advantaged Democrats, do you think Trump Republicans would then say, oh, that's okay, we stick by what we said?
Of course not.
Of course not. Of course not. And then it becomes simply, who can win a knife fight? Well, I'd rather not have our politics be a knife fight. And I'm talking metaphorically here, obviously. I want to make clear with all that's going on. I'd rather have a one that says, listen, the point of a constitutional democracy is that the people of the country determine the course of the government. And then we do everything the first thing we do is do our best to make sure that happens. And we say, I don't want my policy to be implemented if the people of the country don't want it, or as expressed through processes that that have been laid out. But that's not what we have, and we certainly don't. We have the opposite with Trump Republicans, and that's what's so frustrating, because it means that they really just see the exercise of authority as a means to an end, rather than, hey, I have this authority because the people gave it to me, and I believe in the concept of that the government runs on the consent of the governed. All that in Enlightenment philosophy that undergirds our system, that inspired our founders. It's just gobbledygook to these guys, and that, as a historian, as an American, as a patriot, is infuriating, frankly.
I can imagine, and it manifests itself in a number of ways, and I guess if you're, for whatever reason, as yet unconvinced that that's the case with Republicans, I consider how frequently and now how openly they say things like, our founders never intended for there to be a separation of church and state, when it's pretty obvious that they wrote extensively that they did. But they believe that this is to their advantage, and they just simply state as a matter of fact that no, that you misunderstand. I mean, that's just not historically supportable, and in a number of other areas too. But that's the one that's clearest to me, that they simply state as fact. No, it's not it. You got it backwards.
Black is white, white is black, up is down. Right, it's midnight and the sun is out. Right. We can go to the Orwell language. Right, Oceania has always been at war with Pacifica, and then the next day, Oceania has always been allies with Pacifica and is now at war with Atlantica, and that's sort of the point. And then we do a little bit of this in the book too. Is the manipulation, the open manipulation is a show of power. Look. Me being Trump, I have the power to lie to you. I'm lying to you. I know I'm lying to you, but I say I'm telling the truth. And by my statement of my false statement being accepted as truth, I show you how strong I am and make you feel good that you are led by somebody who's strong enough to be able to get away with saying up is down, down is up. It's about projecting strength as a leader, and so there's some psychology around that as well that we do go into in the book.
Interesting, yeah, that too. I mean, that's a huge part of how he wields power, and as you were mentioning, when the Congress either makes a conscious decision either to ratify what he's doing, that they haven't done so far, but even if the decision is let's just jump out of the way, it doesn't say anywhere that we have to say anything. It's dangerous if we don't. It's detrimental to our power base if we don't. But maybe we don't care about that. Maybe it's better to simply say we're along for the ride. We're looking for tips on when to buy Trump coin more than anything else, and that's it. And we've had to deal with that before, and what to do, for instance, when emergency powers for whatever reason are claimed, whether you actually point to an act of Congress that says as president, I have this emergency power and there's a disagreement over it. But our system has had to deal with that before, and the Supreme Court has had to deal with things like that before. And basically the default rule, the way to make all of this work, given that there's no mention of emergency powers in the Constitution, there's no explicit limit either, I guess, and they've turned to the necessary and proper clause more than anything else to say, well, that's pretty vague and wide open. Maybe it's the president must obviously be saying, sometimes they'll impose that speech on him, must obviously be saying that this is necessary and proper to ensure that the laws be faithfully executed. And the only way to determine that, well, maybe that presumption is wrong is if one of the other branches says it is. But if they won't or don't want to say it is, how do we handle that? The thing that came to mind for me, I think, was Justice Frankfurter, just saying that basically these power grabs by anybody, but it was always the case that it happened to be the executive making this claim, that a power grab like that essentially puts the ball in Congress's court if they just won't play it, if they just simply won't react to it. They have every opportunity to say, at a minimum, no, this is beyond your power. If they won't do it, it just sort of becomes part of the gloss on history. The president has now claimed this power. No one has said no. And in our system, that sort of rubber stamps it as there it is. Now it's precedent and other people can claim this power too. An unfortunate, I guess, oversight in the framing of our system, but it wasn't contemplated. Yeah. So we have our own emergency power clause problem, I suppose.
Well, I think we don't have an emergency clause. That's even what's more galling. they just made it up. I mean, in Germany, it was a flaw in the Constitution. Here, it's a flaw in the human beings who aren't actually living up to the Constitution. And the Supreme Court's got to come in, as you mentioned, for some blame on this. There's nowhere in the Constitution where it says the president has immunity from certain things or anything.
Right.
They literally just made that up. President Trump the president is immune from X, Y, and Z. Really? Where? Show me that. You don't think the founders contemplated and chose not to include that?
And as a matter of fact, we are back. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just a 1 minute break, and I feel like we didn't wrap things up well enough with Ian here. So just hanging on to remind everybody, yes, the book is out. How has the experience been, by the way, of having your latest published? This isn't a book tour kind of a book, though, is it?
Well, it's a book tour if 2 events count as a tour. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I should have actually said this before. So we had a nice book event in August at a Barnes & Noble in Smithtown, New York, which is on Long Island. But upcoming, you're all invited on Tuesday, September 30th at 6 p.m. You're all invited to a book event with myself and my wonderful co-author, Dr. Anastasia Carrillo. It's 6 p.m. Tuesday, September 30th at the Upper East Side Barnes & Noble, which is 1550 3rd Avenue and 87th. We will have a discussion of the book, actually moderated by my Empire State University colleague, Dr. Alan Mandel. And Anastasia and I will take questions from Dr. Mandel and from the audience, and we'll even sign books for anybody who wants such a thing to happen. So please come September 30th, 6 p.m., 1550 3rd Avenue, Barnes & Noble.
All right. Yeah, well, we've got to have some audience there. That's reachable for some portion of our audience. Sounds pretty good. Book signing, right? I like that. In case you actually want that to happen, I will write in your book.
I should say, I did say New York City, right? I'm giving you an address,
I think
and I
so.
don't tell you where it is.
Well, you said Upper East Side, and
yes,
we didn't mean Peoria.
Terrible.
Okay.
No, but that's just a terrible New York-centric thing to do, right?
Sure.
That actually is in New York City on the island of Manhattan, and I should not have expected anybody to know what Upper East Side means.
If you can attend, then you know what it means. Now, if you're flying in, okay, fine. Then, you want to make some extra arrangements. Well, thank you, Ian, and thanks for holding on and bring us back around to give us a proper goodbye. Thanks for coming by. It's good to hear from you again. This is trying times, and it's good to have some academic theoretical framework within which to discuss otherwise high tensions and passions being raised by current events. So I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
It's truly my pleasure always, and I hope all of you listening can have some fun as well. Maybe we'll all go see Spinal Tap 2 and get some laughs.
Yeah, right. That's true. So that's coming. I had almost forgotten that was even happening, and I missed the entire development of it. But yeah, for people like us, for some reason, that will be a big event in our coming days. There's a significant portion of the audience that for whom I guess this was like the second round of Star Wars movies. Like, oh yeah, I've heard of that old movie Spinal Tap and seen the memes and maybe even rented it back in the day when you used to have to rent such things. Yeah, I just remember when the first round of the first of the second round of Star Wars movies came out, there was sort of already had been a generational divide on it. Like, oh yeah, I'm aware of that stuff. Okay. Got it.
All right, David, you take care.
Thank you. You too.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks so much. All right. Thanks again, Ian. And we'll talk to you again soon, I hope. Ian Reifowitz, everyone, showing everybody the distinguished part of being a distinguished professor today. Thanks so much. All right. Take care. Well, we've got any number of other subjects to get to here and falling way behind on today's latest news, I guess. And let me see what I've got in store for you. I should probably close Instapaper and reopen it again just to make sure that I've got the latest updates. And I should check in on the latest on what might be happening announcement-wise on the Charlie Kirk front. But, yeah, all right. Well, we've got an identity offered up. Rarely adds anything to our discussion of how those things are going to identify the shooter. And, of course, I would take a wait-and-see attitude on whether or not they eventually end up releasing this guy, too. We know the names of the people that they accidentally or incorrectly detained. So maybe on the third time around, we'll wait and see whether or not they really have the right person. And I don't even know how I'm going to measure whether or not I believe they have the right person. That's sort of the unfortunate byproduct of political direction of the FBI and constant bungling of this particular case. But apparently they got a hold eventually of some surveillance video. It's been such an interesting episode, mostly because, as we were saying, one of the other things I noticed in the morning coverage of it as I was searching out what might be new, fascinating headlines that come along with this in the search. But one of the things was saying that the television news and the traditional news media have covered this and approached airing video of the assassination in their usual manner. That is to say, not showing the most graphic footage of it that was available. However, that made zero difference in the age of everybody at any public event being armed, potentially anyway, armed with, in the metaphorical sense, armed with a video camera. It's built into the cell phones, and that dissemination of that video can be instantaneous as well. So the most outrageous, most visually disturbing video of the assassination was available instantaneously without anybody giving any thought to, should we have this? That's just one of the signs of the times there. Both actual, I guess what you would have to say, gory footage of the assassination itself, and the unconsidered and uncensored immediate reaction of every sort of person in the crowd, from the 99% of the crowd that reacted in horror and ducked and treated the event as it should have been, as it was, as a campus shooting, and everybody panicking and, or in some cases reacting not exactly calmly and rationally, but as people of that age who are on college campuses now, people of college age, do now react to these things. They have been brought up in the era of the school shooting, and they know when you go to an event like this, you are looking around for where are the vulnerabilities and where are the exits and where do I go in case of an emergency of any kind. And that did happen. And the crowd did react that way, and people did get down and low and try to make a hasty exit from the area, assuming that they too could be targets. It turned out, thankfully, not to be the case. But on the other hand, there's also video circulating of people who are first and foremost social media personalities and social media influencers, TikTokers who, in one case, I saw circulated one of the wildest reactions I've ever seen to anything of this sort. Apparently, a TikToker that goes by the, I'll have to, in order to correctly identify them, if that's something you're interested in doing, I'd have to scroll back, but they're in Utah, where where there's an enormous number of members of the Latter-day Saints Church, the Mormons in shorthand, and where elder of the church is, it's a terminology I've never quite understood, because the people who seem to carry the title tend to be actually quite young, but it's, what can I tell you? I don't understand exactly what the process is there, but I run into elders of the LDS Church with some frequency, and they appear to be quite young. And in this case, who am I looking at here? I got to open this up and take a look. Elder TikTok is a social media figure who, now will be bursting onto the scene, having live streamed or videoed himself. Actually, it looks like he was preparing a selfie video of himself at the scene of the shooting within seconds of the shooting going down. And I mean, granted, you're not going to have your head screwed on straight in the middle of an emergency like that, but it was quite astonishing, and it's all done in the vernacular. So I suppose that TikTok fans, this won't be particularly weird or disturbing to have this kind of language being used to frame the situation. But you and I, being people of a certain age, are used to seeing a live report from the site of a political assassination with a different bent. All the panic, all the, perhaps ill-considered and uncensored emotion evident and available. But in terms of, this is Walter Cronkite reporting live from the site of what appears to be, that sort of thing, as opposed to, well, shall I turn up the volume on this guy just so you get a sense of what the modern self-appointed independent journalist type reaction, social media influencer reaction is to an event like this. Here's the audio.
Your boy out on TikTok, there was just a gunshot at Charlie Kirk. We're in Utah. There's a gunfire. This is not a joke. Hey, let's go. It's your boy out on TikTok. There was just a gunfire in Utah. This is not.
So I'm going to stop it here for a second. What's interesting about this is that it is video, and it becomes apparent that he's doing different takes. Not, hot takes, but rather, okay, cut, let's do that again. It does the same intro 2 or 3 times, and later he's going to go back and select the one he wants to be the one that goes up on TikTok. And I mean, That too. This is Walter Cronkite. Like, you could certainly have all of that. Oh my gosh, and we're here, and he's been shot. All that raw emotion, that's not what's out of place. It's the introduction. It's your boy, Elder TikTok. Well, okay, he's speaking to a different generation. It's just a little bit off-putting and shocking for us older folks, the real elders among the group. It's your boy, and he does this. That's some intro too. This is Walter Cronkite reporting live from the scene of it. It's your boy, Elder TikTok. There's just been a shooting. Shots fired, shots fired. You see, as he does it, this is like his third take. He goes to shots fired, shot fired. I'm not joking, or not gonna lie. Everybody's, it's very, skewed to a younger crowd, but there's more. So let's roll this again.
There is a gunfire in Utah. Shots fired here in Utah. This is not a joke. Charlie Kirk, Elder TikTok, Mormon Central, Utah. There was a gun that just fired off here at Charlie Kirk. I am not playing with y'all. Hey, make sure you go to church on Sunday. Read the Book of Mormon. This is not a drill. I'm not playing with y'all. Hey, Jesus is Lord. Jesus will protect you. Jesus is your Savior, bro. I'm not even lying. Make sure you subscribe to Elder TikTok on Instagram.
So that, I thought, was an interesting exit too. Jesus is Lord. Jesus will protect you. But make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to me on Elder TikTok. I mean, wow. So a plug. And, okay, emotions are running high. He's not a skilled reporter, so he doesn't really have very much to say. He just finds 10 different ways of saying a gunshot just went off. I'm in Utah. And eventually he gets around to who got shot, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I also have to tell you that I saw on Blue Sky, thanks to user Kate Bush's husband, just in case you were wondering where it came from, that the story gets even crazier than just this guy. And I mentioned to you that, okay, he's a Mormon elder, and how do you know that? Eventually he gets around to saying, what you need to be doing is going to church on Sunday and reading the Book of Mormon. So, okay, presumably that's why. So it gets even weirder. Here is a screenshot taken, I guess, presumably from X/Twitter, where Para Power Mapping, who, let's see, I guess tweets under the handle, who knows. At any rate, Para Power Mapping has this screenshot, or tweets, and the screenshot is taken here, I guess, by Kate Bush's husband, and disseminated here on Blue Sky. A photo of the scene of the shooting, I imagine mere minutes, if that much, afterwards. Charlie Kirk has already been removed from the scene. It is mostly empty, but you can see that tent from under which he was doing his event. And now, in this selfie video that Elder TikTok makes, you can see very clearly how he's dressed, and you see his white t-shirt and his blue baseball cap, and can you see his the bag he's got on as well? I don't know, in the shot. Oh yeah, I guess you can see the strap of the bag. Anyway, and you can see from the video exactly where he is. He's very close up to the fence line around the tent where Charlie Kirk was speaking. So now here's a picture taken from outside of that, pointed towards the tent, noting this dude, Elder TikTok, here, he's now has hopped the fences and gone into, he's now under the tent where Charlie Kirk had just been speaking, and is in the photograph with the identifiable clothing, up at the table that Kirk was speaking from behind. And the commentary here, this dude, Elder TikTok, Elder TikTok says, stole all the blood-soaked Charlie Kirk merch to sell on eBay. Now, I don't know if that's true. Presumably, this person has seen the things listed on eBay, but it would be a little early for that, you would think. But, clearly we're not going to wait a decent interval to do this. But also pointing out, left his fingerprints all over an active crime scene as soon as he finished recording his selfie vid. New fave shooting deep event character. Very interesting. And he'll be, I think, in some trouble for that. And if he is, in fact, listing this stuff for sale on eBay, it'll be that much easier to pick him up for the crime of interfering with a crime scene. But you'll also note that in this picture, no one, in the panic of the situation, has bothered to secure the crime scene. The police presence at the event, woefully inadequate. But that's a subject for another day. But there you go. I just thought that would be of some interest to you in the weird reaction that we're having to the whole thing, up to and including where we started the show. The president announcing that they have a suspect in custody on Fox television, but from the couch of whatever the hell their stupid morning show is, as opposed to taking the podium, if you will, and speaking from a more official standpoint. In addition, so I thought that was interesting. One of the first stories, headlines that came up was about the changing nature of the way an event like this is disseminated among the American public. We're no longer, waiting for officialdom to make announcements, and no longer able to rely exclusively on credible figures in the mainstream media doing stand-ups from these areas. It's whoever happens to be on hand, for better or for worse. Also, by the way, of some interest, yesterday there was briefly an episode in which the Wall Street Journal was running with supposedly with the story that what authorities believed to be the murder weapon had been discovered, and that there was discovered in this weapon some of the rounds of ammunition that were still in the gun. They went ahead and reported were engraved, they said, with some sort of transgender or anti-fascist ideology, which, everybody knows. All the kids are engraving them on grains of rice these days. Seems like it was, from the outset, widely doubted and then totally retracted in the end. And as it turns out, by the way, the Wall Street Journal ran with the story. The New York Times almost immediately came out with it. Well, other sources granted anonymity from inside the law enforcement community say it might not be so clear. They may be misinterpreting whatever markings there may or may not be on these ammunition, on the casings of the bullets still remaining, the rounds still remaining in the weapon. And indeed, as it turns out, they basically, all I've seen, I haven't seen any imagery that they were supposedly interpreting, but somebody did say all that there is a series of arrows on the casings. And it's not clear whether this is something anybody added afterwards or whether that was part of the manufacturing process or what. And a series of arrows, no description of what makes it a series or what direction they're pointing, and arrows don't appear to have anything to do with anything. And certainly nothing to do with transgender ideology, whatever that might even be. Anti-fascist ideology, I guess, to the extent that there's, I guess that's a little closer to an ideology. But anyway, lots of, basically I think it looked like people were trying to leverage this opening to impose the narrative that they wanted to have on this assassination. But also, by the way, it was of interest to me yesterday that they noted that it was a bolt-action rifle, which they recovered and which the authorities believed was the murder weapon, which makes as much sense as anything. Apparently the shot was taken from some considerable distance and was a rather skilled shot, to say the least, to remove all emotion from the whole thing. And, it was only the one shot. So, yeah, sure, bolt-action rifle it could well have been. And a notable departure from the usual murder weapon of choice in college campuses and mass event areas, the AR-15. So much so that I happened to notice among the Google News results for, hey, what's going on? Do they really have a suspect in custody? Was a Fox News piece titled, "What is a bolt-action rifle?" Oh my. Kids, can we tell you a little something? Back in the day before the AR-15, right. We're at the stage now where large swaths of the American public need to be told what is a bolt-action rifle. All I hear about is the AR-15s. A bolt-action rifle Well, what we know about the gun used to kill Charlie Kirk. I'm not going to go and bother reading the story, but I'm hopeful that most of you are familiar with what a bolt action. Oh, maybe I shouldn't be hoping, but unfortunately, most of us are probably already familiar. Even if it's just a study in history for you. What is a bolt action rifle? Well, it's the kind of rifle that was used to assassinate John F. Kennedy, who, by the way, is related to the current Health and Human Services Secretary, if your only frame of reference for Kennedys is that. But if that's the case, I'm sorry. But presumably, if you're listening to the show, you'll have more interest in history and you'll go and brush up on it. But I bet you already know. I just found that astonishing, right? The idea, what is a bolt action rifle? I guess we got to do that now. All right. Wasn't where I meant to spend my time, though. Other stories that I think, I don't know. Well, because we've sort of focused on this and, by now we really should be able to say we've had enough of the Charlie Kirk story. But if I can share this, this might help sum things up, because this was a story yesterday, continues to be a story today, and Jonathan Chait has some organized thoughts about it. In The Atlantic, Trump's dangerous response to the Kirk assassination, and in fact other people's dangerous response too, rather than condemning violence, as for instance Ian Reifowitz and all right-thinking people in America did, and calling for unity, rather than any of that, the President of the United States accused his political opposition of being accessories to murder. And, that is problematic in its own way. It is possible, Jonathan begins, that in the history of America's radicalization spiral, the horrifying, cold-blooded assassination of the right-wing activist Charlie Kirk will be recorded as only the second most dangerous event of September 10th, 2025. If so, the more significant development will instead have been the speech that evening by Donald Trump. And by the way, that's another one. I saw it, or I saw a video of it, but of course I saw it presented by Aaron Rupar. And that may be because I don't normally turn on my television habitually in situations like this anymore. That's not part of my usual response. Used to be the only way to get that kind of news. I am not certain whether did networks carry these remarks from the Oval Office, because the visuals provided by Aaron Rupar's sources, which usually are right-wing news networks, One America News or I don't forget what's one that actually has the word right in it. But anyway, I wondered whether just, again, alternative quote-unquote news sources, since everybody's got a cell phone camera, or if you've got an even more sophisticated camera, and the president wants to have time to address, even improperly and ill-advisedly address the nation from behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office, and even if the networks disagree with the wisdom of doing it, and I don't know if they did, and they might be afraid to, you can always just videotape it and put it out on One America News Network, and then it will be disseminated on social media and look as though it were an, quote-unquote officially sanctioned all networks address. And I don't even know whether it was. But that's what he's referring to here. The more significant development might be the speech that evening by President Donald Trump, which is troubling. Now we don't have even the filter of the network saying, no, this is wildly inappropriate. I'm not going to carry this. Anyway, if you did not listen to Trump's remarks, which have received only light attention from the media, which is what made me think maybe they didn't carry it, you might have missed the chilling message they contained. But I did get the chilling message thanks to Aaron Rupar. Trump may have sounded like he was deploring violence and calling for unity. In reality, he did the opposite. The speech began and ended with encomiums. Oh my goodness. Am I getting this right? Another word that I've experienced in my silent reading, but never really had to read aloud. It's an unusual word choice. But the speech began and ended with encomiums to Kirk's character and family, which is, again, it's standard operating procedure, but it's being used here as cover for an extraordinarily bad person with a terrible record, and turning them into not only a martyr, which I assumed the right wing was going to try and turn him into, but turn him into some sort of truth-telling orator whose political assassination elevates him to the level of Martin Luther King or others. And he was not. He was, somebody else, but he's basically a YouTuber or a TikToker who got shot for various reasons, and I guess one day we might find out what they are. But that doesn't actually make him. It doesn't improve his record at all. But it's the sort of thing that people say when somebody gets killed during that interval between the immediacy of it and when you can actually look back on it and reflect on it. We're just not permitted to do that, generally speaking. All right, we'll get back to what Jonathan Chait has to say after we take a 2-minute break to regroup. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Scott's got some hits on the type of ammunition used in the assassination, although no indication. This is a discussion from some number of years ago about, I guess, a new kind of, is it Turkish manufactured ammunition? Maybe. I don't know. But it comes from an ammunition discussion forum of something from the year 2020. No indication, though, what the arrows are about and or where they came from. But, if this is the ammunition, it doesn't appear from any of the pictures that there are any arrows from the manufacturer. Although what you would be doing etching, it's a political assassination, so it's not beyond imagining that there might be some sort of weird messaging going on. But it does seem like an awful waste of time. But there's always been this grand tradition of these of messaging on ammunitions, or like the idiomatic expression of bullets having your name on them, and then people taking it literally. But seems like a delicate operation to be etching brass casings of ammunition, and not entirely clear what they're talking about. No pictures available of this stuff, as far as I can tell. And a series of arrows, like, what is it? This end up, this side forward, like which direction is the bullet going to go? That seems unnecessary. But, I have no idea what we're talking about here, so I can't even guess. But back to Jonathan Chait, who was saying that the speech, I guess was framed as a traditional one in the sense that it, as said here, began and ended with encomiums, maybe, to Kirk's character and family, which is wholly appropriate. The important and dangerous passage came in a sequence of 4 sentences in the middle, and I guess here they are. And it's Trump, so for years, those on the radical left have, and as he usually does with speeches like this, if he's reading, it comes across as very passionless and obvious. But for years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis. I'm going to dispense with the voice at this point. To Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today and must stop right now. Subtext being, oh, what about the sort of rhetoric being directly responsible for, let's say radicalizing people about immigration. Everybody's a rapist. Everybody's illegal. Everybody should be arrested. Everybody should be killed at the border. We should shoot them as they're on their way into the United States. No responsibility for rhetoric like that. And it must stop now to make way, I think, for his own rhetoric. Anyway, my administration, he went on to babble, will find each and every one of those who contributed to this atrocity. It's one shooter. And to other political violence. Just slide that right in there too. And what is political violence? It's anything we don't like. You pushed back when a cop hit you over the head. Political violence. And now we're going to search each and every one of you out. They just slide that right in there, including the organizations that fund it and support it, as well as those who go after our judges, law enforcement officials, and everyone else who brings order to our country. Never mind that the most famous and celebrated, or infamous and celebrated cases of going after judges and law enforcement officials are MAGA people who did so, January 6th, in the wake of January 6th afterwards, who were convicted in courts of law on January 6th and nonetheless, before reporting to prison and eventually being pardoned, but before reporting to prison, recorded TikTok videos of themselves saying we should murder the judges and the FBI investigators who are bringing me to justice. And, that gets pardoned too. Don't worry about it. But, without any sense of hypocrisy or irony, he makes this speech. From the attack on my life in Butler, Pennsylvania last year, which killed a husband and father, to the attacks on ICE agents, to the vicious murder of a healthcare executive in the streets of New York, to the shooting of House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, that was years ago, of course, and 3 others. Radical left political violence has hurt too many innocent people and taken too many lives, and no mention, of course, right away, most of you are noticing, of anything from out of Minnesota, but what the hell? That's Trump. Trump was reading from a script, so unlike many of his more clumsy statements, this bears the mark of deliberate thought, even if it's not his own, I would add. Trump's rhetoric assumes that a left-wing activist murdered Kirk. This may well be borne out. This morning, investigators found bullets, quote, engraved with expressions of transgender and anti-fascist ideology, unquote, inside the suspected murder weapon, according to the Wall Street Journal. But when the president made this claim, there was literally no evidence of this at all, not even a suspect identified by law enforcement, let alone proof of motive. Not to mention the fact that the Wall Street Journal had to end up retracting that. The most important move Trump made in his remarks was to define political violence as an exclusively left-wing tactic. He listed a series of events carefully selected to implicate his enemies and exonerate his allies. Trump's list goes back to the 2017 shooting of Steve Scalise, but omits the shootings of 2 Democratic legislators at their homes earlier this summer. It does not mention the 2020 attempted kidnapping of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer or the brutal attack on former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband in 2022, which Trump has used as a punchline to mock the victim. Notably, Trump's list ignores the shooting just 1 month ago at CDC headquarters, in which a man protesting COVID-19 vaccines fired more than 180 shots at the building and killed a police officer, but includes, quote, attacks on ICE agents, unquote, which have not involved gunfire. Trump, of course, handed out pardons to supporters who brutalized police officers on January 6th. This week, his allies in the Senate defended his bestowal of military honors upon Ashley Babbitt, who was shot trying to smash her way through the Capitol in the insurrection attempt. Every political movement in history, including the most bloodthirsty, has condemned political violence by its opponents. The only real test is whether you also oppose political violence by your allies. Which, of course, is a test that, Democrats and left-leaning folks on social media pass every time, and passed in this case with flying colors as well, despite the fact that there's always somebody who will say something terrible and out of sorts, or something that's regarded as terrible and out of sorts, even if it isn't. And of course, plenty of agents provocateur as well, whose object is to be seen doing that and to have it perceived as having come from whatever their political enemies may be. Every political movement, as we say, in history, including the most bloodthirsty, has condemned political violence by the opponents. Because condemning political violence is a matter of principle, it remains necessary no matter which side has committed more violence. However, to the extent that Trump is implying that the left bears exclusive or even just disproportionate responsibility for violence, he is wrong. No, he is wrong. And yeah, we go
wrong, sir. Wrong.
Okay, no room for that. A 2022 study, we got to have a study about it. Now, you know it's wrong, but this is Jonathan Chait and The Atlantic and left-leaning people. I need to have a study. Okay, a 2022 study by the Anti-Defamation League, which is not a left-wing group, by the way, and also not really in anybody's good graces here at the moment, found that over the previous decade, more than 3/4 of political murders in the United States resulted from right-wing motives. Back when they worried about such things, I guess. Having implicitly redefined political violence to exclude the political right, which is actually sort of the basis of their, it's their core principle and their reason for being, is having each other's back in the effort to normalize their own political violence, but whatever. Having implicitly redefined political violence to exclude the political right, just definitionally, when we do it, it's not political violence. Trump proceeded to expand its definition far beyond violence or even incitement. He blamed Kirk's murder on those who, quote, compared wonderful Americans like Charlie, he's not, to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. Here, Trump reiterated a charge that he and his supporters made after the Butler shooting. The argument is that to compare an American political figure to a totalitarian is to justify acts of violence against them. That if you say somebody is a member of an authoritarian political movement, you must also be saying that any methods may be used to stop them. It would be perverse to create a rule that prevents Americans from frankly calling out authoritarian politics and movements for fear that such a complaint would justify violence. Anti-authoritarian movements generally grasp that only peaceful action can preserve democratic norms and institutions, and that violence merely feeds into the cycle of escalation and erodes them. Even if one did subscribe to this strange prohibition on describing political opponents as authoritarian, however, Trump himself violates it routinely and flagrantly, likening his opponents to communists and Nazis as a matter of course. Last year, to pick one example out of hundreds, he accused Biden of running a Gestapo administration. So Trump is not offering a neutral guideline for making American political debate more civil. He is proposing a rule that binds his opponents but does not protect them, and protects him and his allies but does not bind them. The breadth of Trump's targets was notable. He called the radical left, a term he routinely uses to describe the entire Democratic Party, directly responsible, that's what he said, directly responsible for the murder, and promised that his administration would go after it, including its funding sources. Both Trump's intentions and his capacity to follow through on his threats are unclear, yet here is the straightforward reading of the rhetoric. The President of the United States is treating the political opposition as accessories to murder and threatening to use the full power of the government to attack it. The end. But normally, that would go nowhere. But have you met the director of the FBI? Have you met the director of national intelligence? Have you met the deputy director of the FBI? Have you met the attorney general? All these people are going to feel forced. Well, they might feel forced if there was any indication that they were ever going to have an attack of conscience. But they're going to willingly do this. If for some reason they were to have an attack of conscience, grow one, and say, wait a minute, maybe this is a bad idea long term. then they would be forced. So it's going to happen. And if they are forced and they won't do it, they'll be fired and replaced with somebody who will. So it's worth taking note of. The President of the United States is going to try and make the federal government in its totality target anybody who identifies with the Democratic Party as directly responsible for a murder. That's, it may just be rhetoric to him. And he may, it may just be like, well, that's just very powerful and strong sounding. And I don't really understand what it means to say directly responsible. I just know that that's the sort of thing that, makes people go, grr, yeah. I don't know what that means, but rawr. And that could be, as far as it goes, it may very well be. And I'm sure that his supporters will eventually say, well, this is one of those situations in which the president is meant to be taken seriously, but not literally. I think this is like exactly the sort of situation in which they think that's an answer that's worth giving. Well, he doesn't mean really. That's exactly how they're framing what Charlie Kirk was all about. Well, he was a great orator and a great truth teller. Well, he said things like, and take your pick. Everybody's done a great job cataloging the worst of the worst things that Charlie Kirk has ever said, and there's hundreds of them. There's no way to decide which one's the worst. He regularly said things that are well beyond the bounds of any sort of civil discourse and that were clearly designed to incite violence of the sort that killed him, but against other people, you see. And yet they'll say, well, he was to be taken seriously, but not literally. And as members of Congress, Anna Paulina Luna, and a few other weirdo lunatics have said, we should honor him with a statue in Congress, in Statuary Hall in the Capitol. There should be a Charlie Kirk statue. And by way of justification, Anna Paulina said, well, there's one of the statues of Martin Luther King. Why not? Well, I mean, why not Mr. Beast? There's statues of Martin Luther King, so why not a statue of some other human being? It just doesn't hang together. But to say we're going to put up a statue of somebody in Statuary Hall, and the epitaph for that person is, well, he was just kidding. Take him seriously, but not literally. Well, wait a second. If you're going to honor the legacy of this great orator, why not do them the honor of quoting them directly and taking them at face value? But I mean, if you're going to stand there at the statue dedication ceremony, I mean, some of these people are crazy enough to do it. I won't dare them to do it because I think they'll follow through with it. But if America sees them standing before the cameras and saying, the reason we're dedicating this statue here today is because Charlie brought us simple truths like all black people are incompetent to any serious undertaking. Well, gee whiz, that doesn't feel like a particularly statue-worthy thing to say. Oh, but, don't take him literally, but do take him seriously. He was just kidding. Well, we don't do statues to he was just kidding. I mean, I guess we do now, but we haven't done the statue just yet. I don't know. Just something to keep an eye on. It's Friday, so there we are. Okay, let's see. Other things that we might be able to shoehorn in here on a Friday. I'll follow up on another piece of news entirely. The recent raid on the Georgia car battery plant in which several hundred South Korean nationals were arrested. When we reported the story, they were about ready to say, all right, what they had arranged for a voluntary departure of these Korean nationals in order to avoid, I guess, the stigma of being deported. And I think it sounds like the government basically said, we're going to delay their departure because we don't want them to be able to leave without the stigma of deportation. And there was some delay for some reason in letting them go. The Korea Times reported it this way a couple of days ago. Let me open it up in the browser here. What was it? September, published the 10th. So that's Wednesday. Detained Korean workers' departure from U.S. delayed. So they were further detained in their initial detention. Bak Yoon-ji is my best attempt at the pronunciation for the byline here. Questions remain over re-entry risks for detainees. That was also part of the bargain, was supposed to be available to people who leave voluntarily. The planned departure of hundreds of Korean workers detained in Georgia during an immigration raid has been delayed, we were told on Wednesday. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced on Wednesday due to a cause from the U.S. side. What was it? It did not explain what the cause was, raising concerns that their detention could be extended. The ministry said in a message to reporters that the plane's departure, which was initially planned for 2:30 p.m. Wednesday local time from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, was postponed without stating a new departure time. The government is continuing consultation with the U.S., that would be the Korean government, for a swift departure as swift a departure as possible. We'll provide further updates once a new schedule is confirmed. The announcement was made hours after a Korean Air charter flight departed Incheon International Airport for Hartsfield-Jackson Airport to transport some 300 Koreans. They were scheduled to arrive in Korea the following evening. While the ministry is refraining from naming the cause of the delay, speculation is rising that the two sides may have different interpretations of the nature of the departure and whether the workers will face restrictions if they try to re-enter the country. The Korean government has sought to frame the departures as voluntary, but a senior U.S. official referred to the move as deportation. Cho Ki-jung, Korea's consul general in Washington, visited the Folkestone Detention Center where the detainees were being held. We have worked with the U.S. authorities to complete the necessary procedures, he said, adding that the officials were doing everything possible to ensure a smooth transfer. Seoul has stressed that the workers will leave under the rules of voluntary departure, which do not carry the same legal consequences as deportation. Nevertheless, U.S. immigration law allows for bans to be imposed depending on the length of the unlawful stay, so the possibility of individual penalties cannot be ruled out. The situation became more confusing when some detainees signed forms early on that included a $1,000 payment for voluntary departure to avoid a 10-year entry ban. And it's not even clear to me what the policy is here. $1,000 payment. I think originally the Elon Musk dodgy boy types were saying, why don't we pay people $1,000 to voluntarily self-deport? But I wouldn't be surprised if that has somehow transfigured itself into, well, if you buy $1,000 worth of Trump coin, we'll let you go. I don't know which direction this $1,000 is going. That's amazing. It is possible that the U.S. authorities may regard those who sign the forms as admitting the illegality of their stay and later ban them from re-entering. A lawyer helping the workers in Georgia told Yonhap News that Korean consular staff learned about these forms being signed and made the paperwork invalid, which only aggravated confusion among the workers. The debate intensified after U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem showed up again. She's been missing and all this, and said they will be deported, a remark widely seen as blurring the line between two very different legal outcomes and raising fears that it could affect future visa screenings. And again, another example, Kristi Noem just maybe not having the mental firepower, or maybe doing this on purpose, or she may be describing it exactly as they intend to view it. This is a deportation, and not understanding that they're differences and nuances in different ways to leave the country. Not that I think it's all that important, but it may be just that she's like, I don't know, there's an airplane and they're leaving. So deportation. Foreign Minister Cho Hyun, who was in Washington for talks with Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the time, informed lawmakers prior to his trip that the two governments had reached a broad agreement on avoiding reentry problems. We are working to ensure citizens are treated as voluntary departures and not disadvantaged later, he said. However, his meeting with Rubio was postponed from Tuesday to Wednesday, local time, and the delay raised concerns that the two countries had not finalized an agreement on the reentry issue, just as they haven't on tariffs and trade issues as well. Nobody writes anything down. Trump and paperwork, man. Before meeting the Secretary of State, Cho had a meeting in Washington with officials from LG, Hyundai Motor, Samsung Electronics, Hanwha, and SK, among other major firms operating in the country. The companies called for a separate E4 visa quota for Korean professionals, higher approval rates for E2 investor visas, the kind Trump likes, and clearer guidelines on the short-term business visas such as the B1. The foreign minister said these concerns had already been communicated with Washington, promised to continue advocating for solutions to enable Korean businesses to operate with more stability and predictability. That's what everybody wants. Meanwhile, Trump doesn't. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt explained that the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Commerce were collaborating to prevent similar incidents. She added that the administration was coordinating across agencies to resolve visa issues affecting foreign corporate employees. The large-scale raid, of course, as you know, took place on September 4th at the Hyundai Motor LG Energy Solution battery plant in Ellavale, Georgia. You know the backstory on that. We can skip and jump out of that and look for the latest that I have put away, anyway, on the situation closer to the top here. A BBC report from probably just yesterday. We'll open that one up as well. Gene McKenzie and Peter Hoskins and Kelly Yang reporting on this one just from earlier today. South Korean workers detained in U.S. raid arrive home. More than 300 South Koreans who were detained, you know all about it, did arrive safely back home. Their return comes as the country's president and Hyundai's chief executive have warned about the impact of the raid. A chartered Korean Air jet took them home, along with 14 non-Koreans who were also detained in the raid and took off on the same flight. One South Korean national has reportedly chosen to stay in the U.S. to seek permanent residency. Why? The incident has shaken ties between the U.S. and South Korea, whose companies are investing billions in the states. Investment President Donald Trump has pushed to secure. The workers, oh, by the way, yeah, that's an interesting banner up at the Korean Airlines desk at Incheon, a banner that says, "We're friends, aren't we?" And it is a picture of a figure in an ICE uniform, all black, yada yada, with a set of chains over his shoulder to arrest people, a bag full of cash with an American flag on it, and a Donald Trump mask on. It's interesting. You should take a look at it for yourself. The workers' departure, of course, was delayed by more than a day because of an instruction from the White House. Interestingly, that's where they put the blame there. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung said on Thursday, Trump ordered the pause to check whether the workers were willing to remain in the U.S. to continue working and training Americans, according to the South Korean Foreign Ministry officials. Isn't that interesting? In the middle of all this nonsense, in the middle of what they're putting them through, in the middle of pulling the rug out from underneath them. Well, I noticed that a lot of you want to be self-deported so that you don't face problems coming back into the country. Would you come back here and work? Would you come back here and train your replacements? Wow. Okay. The workers looked happy but tired as they were brought through Incheon International Airport and shepherded onto buses to be reunited with their families. "I'm back. I'm free," one of them shouted. "I escaped America. I'm free." A large group of journalists had gathered at the airport ahead of the workers' arrival on Friday. There were also a few people protesting the raid. One of them held up the banner showing Trump in the uniform of an immigration agent with the caption, "We're friends, aren't we?" Another protester's banner read, "Public outrage over detention of 300 Koreans shackled up and treated like major criminals. Why shall we continue U.S. divestments after such backstabbing?" It's a long banner. The returning workers have requested privacy. South Korea's foreign ministry said earlier on Friday, advising media outlets to blur any photographs and videos that they won't be identified. Security at the airport was tight. There's background given to the story, but I think that's the key parts, the key takeaways I wanted to grab from out of this article. And now, of course, we're out of time for anything else anyway, but there is plenty more. We'll sort of shout things out and advise you to catch up over the weekend. News from out of Brazil, very interesting as well, as Brazil's former president Bolsonaro found guilty of leading of coup charges, has essentially had his conviction upheld by the Brazilian Supreme Court. So just by way of, mentioning this on the way out the door at some point, due process of law finds the guy guilty of attempting a coup to overthrow the Brazilian government. They're going to hold him accountable. And the United States reaction to that, remember, we imposed additional tariffs on Brazil because they were holding their former president accountable for attempting to lead a coup. Now it's been vindicated by their highest legal sources. We essentially are saying, we know better than your Supreme Court. Let our Supreme Court settle this. We know better. So we're not only punishing them financially for being a better and more functioning democracy than we are, I guess, but we're now thinking of retaliating further. And apparently, somewhere along the line, it seems that Marco Rubio has commented along the lines of, well, you're going to hold your president accountable for trying to incite political violence to overthrow the duly elected government of Brazil when he lost the election. You're going to hold him accountable for that? That's an attack on us. And talk about telling on yourself. I'm not certain what the actual wording of it was, but one of the things that I saw flying by on social media, I'll have to track that one down. So note to self in the last minute here to track down Marco Rubio's comments just to see if we got it right. There's a lot to catch up on over the weekend. A lot of long reads I didn't get to, wanted to share with you, but maybe we can call out a headline or two just to give you an idea of where we were hoping to go. The Untold Story ProPublica publishes of what happened when dodgies stormed Social Security. Sort of a interesting alternative read of Leland Dudek's doings inside of the Social Security Administration. Don't know if I fully buy it or if it's just self-serving garbage, but ProPublica found it interesting enough to share with us. You might want to take a look at it over the weekend too. Now, though, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. As always, following our program here
netrootsradio.com.
on netrootsradio.com.
You have been
as it
listening
happens.
to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
What's up? Top of the order for today as Trump musters his illegal federal shock troops to invade and occupy major Democratic sanctuary cities and states. Leaders of those cities and states have unleashed an unexpected pushback. Those with Democratic governors, I think, have succeeded. Chicago appears to be off the table. Looks like Memphis may be next. Stay tuned for real details with Justice.